I'm stealing that term. Creator
There you
enablement.
go, creator enablement. Steal it. IP starting today. Trademark. I think that is the way that you diversify risk. Because
And how do I do it in a way that honors the investment of blood, sweat, and tears?
Are we considered geriatric millennials? Is that what we
You know what? Legacy building more, right? Like what?
What's going on, boys and girls? Mike and Garrio Harrison here with another conversation of marketing adjacent. Garrio, I sent you this yesterday, I think, maybe, or 2 days ago. There's this article in, I think, Business Insider about blue zones. And I thought it was really fascinating because if anyone listening or watching, if you haven't seen the documentary series on Netflix, I think it's like Live to 100. I think it's what it's called. I think it's like a 4-part series, really, well made, etc., as Netflix usually does. Ever since that came out, all I've seen is blue zones stuff everywhere. LinkedIn, my Google News feed, wherever. Now, obviously, there's some algorithmic stuff there, but it's definitely out there much more than I've ever seen in the past. And I follow this stuff quite a bit. I'm interested in like longevity and stuff. I follow Peter Attia and read his books, and he talks about it a bit too, and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I think to me, I think the fascinating thing here is this is not the first time we've seen this like Netflix effect, right? We saw it with other things they've released, whether it was what was it, Squid Game? I remember back in the day, like everybody just went absolutely nuts over it. And there's been other things like that. I think it was on Netflix that released. Did they release Super Size Me way back in the day?
Yeah,
I think so, right? And then all of a sudden that became a big thing. So this idea of like Netflix being such an important part of our culture and society, that anything that makes it there has the ability to make an outsized impact, good or bad, on how we behave, what we think, what we do, all this kind of stuff. So I thought it would be interesting to talk about that. And, we see this in other instances too, right? Where you see it with Shark Tank. I remember a really early client for Gabby and I. It was this guy who had these high fidelity earplugs. The name of the company,
yeah.
Vibes. Anyway, and he was on Shark Tank. And if you look at I still remember looking at their website traffic, and it was like, and then like slowly, whatever. And then there was a rerun, and then the same thing, it would spike and things like that. So you see it kind of all over the place, things like this, where, pop culture, if you will, significantly impacts business and society. One last thing I'll say, and then I'm curious on your thoughts, Garrio, is, like this guy, I don't want to mispronounce his name, Butner, I think is his last name, Butner. Anyway, yeah, I think I got that right. Anyway, he's been talking about this for, I think, decades. Now, interestingly, so here's the other fun part. Even though I've been really clued into this stuff, I'd never heard of him or his work on blue zones until I saw this documentary. I'd read all sorts of other stuff about it, and I've heard about it from other, longevity experts and stuff like that, but never from him. And I've never seen his content until I watched the Netflix thing, and now I follow him on LinkedIn and stuff like that, which I also find kind of interesting. So it's like he went from, I would say, obscurity to like the general population to like everybody knows who he is, and everybody knows about blue zones, and now there's like the blue zone diet and all this stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think it's fascinating to me of how all these things interconnect and how I guess the tie into marketing for me is how understanding the ecosystem that we play in, whether that be as an individual business in an industry or a consumer business that's much broader, or heck, even just as people, whatever. Politicians play the same thing. Understanding the ecosystem and the vectors of influence that exist, I think is so critical to success. And again, I think these things are uh, an outlier, almost like example of this. Like, not every single thing can influence it in this way, and not everybody can make a Netflix documentary.
Right.
But it's interesting. Oh, yeah, the one other one actually that I just remembered, kind of in the same space, is on Disney Plus. It was Nat Geo did this also longevity, interesting documentary with Chris Hemsworth called is it Invincible? I forget what it was called, but it was fairly recent. The same thing, and all of a sudden, like that became like a whole cultural phenomenon and whatnot. So anyway, Garrio, I've been chatting and yakking away here. What do you think about all this?
Man, there's a few different threads to pull on here. When you originally shared the article, the thing that stood out to me was you talked about the importance of earning the ability to influence, right? So being seen as a subject matter expert, and how important that is. And the thing that caught my attention to that, so I actually have the Blue Zone book, and it's one of these things, like I didn't even recognize the guy until I read the book, but wasn't really paying much attention to the author until you mentioned him. Then I went and looked him up on Instagram, started following him there. But the thing that occurred to me was two things. The first is his intellectual property around this idea that he wrote a book about, that everyone has come to know him for. I'm sure he's monetizing the Blue Zone diet and all that. Like, it was his idea. He started sharing it on Instagram, right, and wherever else. I'm sure he's got a bunch of YouTube talks and so on around it. It got picked up by a few hospital systems. That's actually how I came to this book. We were working with a hospital system that wanted to introduce this as a part of their wellness campaign. So we had to read this book as a part of it. But then that was so popular and had such a following that Netflix was able to see, okay, it's a safe bet to turn this into a docuseries, right? So you start to see that original investment in being seen as a subject matter expert in this concept of a blue zone, leading to all these opportunities, right? And the second part of this, there's two other parts. Second part is, Ogilvy just released this study that they did on B2B influencers, right? And the big takeaway for me in that, which came out I saw it this week, which is why it kind of is connecting some dots here, is unlike B2C influencers, that it's all about the amount of followers you have and all that. like you can't be a B2B influencer without actually having subject matter expertise, right? Like you, like him, I would put him squarely in the category of a B2B influencer, right? Like he's a known entity, a subject matter expert, and he is monetizing his intellectual property. Um, and when you think about things like, that same concept of the B2B influencer, um, you take that to an organization. Why wouldn't you put your marketing dollars into turning your subject matter experts in your organization into this kind of a um, into this kind of an influencer? And the main thing for him, like it was, the article talked about, I think it was TikTok. He had a TikTok following. He's clearly super active on Instagram. You mentioned following him on LinkedIn. I'm gonna have to look him up and follow him there too. But what can an organization do to empower their subject matter experts in their organization to do that? Right? Like that's like the investment. Like you can clearly see the payback on that investment, right? Especially if that person is also in a sales or a sales support role, because now they're seen as a trusted advisor. I'm sure that this healthcare system that we were working with, if he had a consulting arm that helps communities that want to build a blue zone, you know,
Which I
I'm
believe he
sure.
does. I mean, if you look at the documentary, I mean, that apparently he's been doing that for, I don't know, over a decade. There's
Well, there
like,
you go.
I think 10, maybe 15 projects he's done across the US.
Yeah. So I mean, you take that same concept, and if you're you know, I'm just making something up here, a rubber manufacturer, and your engineers are viewed as a subject matter expert, um, and they're creating content, and then one of your offerings is, uh, formula consulting, right? You're gonna get that call from the procurement folks over the competition, because like Dan, you're known for a niche you own, right? So yeah, the B2B thing with Ogilvy and this got me like just really excited about the importance of investing in turning your expertise and your intellectual property into a marketing resource.
Yeah, I think, you said something early on, which is, earning the ability to influence. Um, and if you, there's almost like two sides to this coin. So there's that. And if you look at, you see this a lot with comedians, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they plug along for a while. They do shows, live shows, all this kind of stuff. And then at some point, the the top 0.01% of them make it big, where
Mm-hmm.
they get a Netflix special, and then maybe that can then take them to the next level of having like a syndicated show. I mean, you saw like Kevin James do it. Obviously, Jerry Seinfeld was, I think, the first, probably maybe not the first, I don't know, but first that I know of at least. And there's been others, right?
Mm-hmm.
Roseanne and movies too, right? Kevin Hart,
Yep.
things like that.
Chappelle, Kevin
So
Hart. Yep.
yeah, there's a bunch that I'm sure I'm forgetting. So that goes first. You got to earn your ability to influence, right? So now
Mm-hmm.
you are the commodity, if you will, that people want, and now you're a safe bet, like you said. On
Right.
the flip side, I feel like there's also under as that as the person that's trying to build your influence, there's this need and ability to understand the market and understand the ecosystem. So if I look at now again, I don't know the guy. I don't know if he thought this way in particular. I would be surprised if he didn't, um, but this is not the first health and wellness documentary that Netflix put out, right? They've been doing this again. I think the first one might have been Super Size Me back in, what was it, like 2016, maybe earlier even. I don't remember, because it was a while ago. So, and they saw a lot of success with it, and they've done a bunch of others, and some of them have been controversial. We don't have to get into all that stuff, right? There's that the one where they're talking about the vegan diet. I remember that one got a little flack. But anyway, point being is he's already an expert in this space. And he also sees, hey, there's an opportunity to reach a much bigger audience by tapping into the safe bet of that Netflix already believes in. Right. And I'm sure if I had to guess, he was probably shopping this to more than just Netflix. I can't imagine it was just one, one entity he went to. But it's again, understanding what's happening in the ecosystem in society, right? Because I think the work he does and where he gets, I would guess the majority of his money, and maybe until Netflix at least, is these consulting engagements with, municipalities and cities and things like that. So that's definitely a B2B play. But it only works if you can influence the general public. So there's a B2C component to this too. It's kind of an interesting line he's got to straddle, right? So I think there's this immense value in understanding your ecosystem, right? So kind of taking your example you're making up around whatever, say the rubber manufacturer, I think you were talking about. You can have your individual people build up expertise and whatnot, but understanding the ecosystem, meaning is environment, I'm totally making this up, I don't know enough about the industry, but like, is environmentally friendly rubber, is that a trend now that we need to address? Who are the people in that tangential space, right? Or even more so, maybe it's not as much environmentally friendly rubber as the trend of ESG in general, which I do know for a fact is a thing pretty much across the board, right? So do we need to be talking to corporate environmental experts and creating content with them and tapping into their audiences, right? To build up the influence of our experts, things I think, again, to me, it comes back to really deeply understanding the ecosystem. Like, who are the people whose opinions matter, not just directly in your little sliver of the market, right? Because it's easy to say, well, we make rubber, so we're only gonna, we're gonna go to rubber manufacturing conferences and events, and we're going to speak at those, and maybe we'll put a rubber engineering podcast out there, whatever it may.
Right.
Like, cool, that's fine, but that completely misses out on the broader ecosystem of influence. If that's all you're going to do, and obviously that's a very simplified and dumbed down version of what somebody would probably do. Although many manufacturers don't even build their brands at all, so that's a whole different conversation. But yeah, I think to me, when I saw this, it really made me think about, things that we talk about all the time with our clients, is this whole thing of understanding your ecosystem and who are what are the vectors of influence, and not influencers in the traditional sense, but what are the vectors of influence? Meaning, are there groups out there? Are there, do you go vertical? Do you go horizontal? Like, what are the tangential people and groups and entities where things make sense? And I also think the other interesting thing to me on this one is, I don't know if it makes sense in the example we're making up here, but just like with this guy and this whole Blue Zone thing, there are a number of industries out there where I think straddling this B2B and more general consumer B2C influencer thing could be and should be an interesting thing to consider. Because at the end of the day, people are people. Now that's a much harder thing. I mean, you're talking like the whole pull strategy and whatnot. It's hard to measure and all that kind of fun stuff, but that's the other place where my mind goes.
Yeah, I think there's something that you mentioned that I think, is worth emphasizing is this whole idea of understanding the ecosystem. And even just taking it a step further, forget the ecosystem of, health and wellness, right? That's something, bring it all the way down to like sales, right? You know, understanding how a buying decision gets made. So you're understanding the path to a decision, right? From a need, an acknowledgement of need, all the way through to a leadership team meeting where the decision to make the investment this quarter or next quarter comes in. Within that whole sales cycle, there are influencers, there are, people who are a part of the conversation. There are people who, customers that if this thing is implemented will benefit from it. There's so many different factors or, human beings who are a part of this decision one way or the other. And I think historically, a lot of time, everyone from a sales perspective tries to focus on who's the decision maker. Well, understanding the ecosystem on a whole, you can both understand and know which levers to pull, which will inform that decision maker's decision. Which means you can't just, hey, every conversation needs to let me talk to your boss kind of a thing so that you can make a decision. It's as a subject matter expert, being viewed as an expert in that ecosystem and being able to shepherd someone all the way through to a decision, like that's where the investment should be made from a
Yeah.
marketing perspective, especially as we start to see this explosion of just content for the sake of content. And, you know, you have no idea what's happening behind the curtain. Like right now, CFOs are getting way more involved, right? CEOs and leadership teams are getting way more hands-on because they can't afford to make like wonky decisions anymore. So even direct reports or managers are now like decisions are being shepherded through the leadership team. But when you talk with those folks, you'll never know that because they're not going to tell you. But if you've invested the time to understand how decisions are being made in the ecosystem that you're playing in, now you have a better chance of actually moving the conversation forward. But it all comes back to, like Dan here, why you? Like, what's your subject matter expertise? When I go look you up, like, I guarantee you during the due diligence process of they got the script and they said, okay, we're gonna do this blue zone thing, and they got the script. I guarantee you there was a marketing person, it's Dan and probably 12 other shows that they were looking at, and they, as a part of the due diligence process, can he help promote this thing? Does he have a big enough audience that'll be interested in following along? Is there data around the that this is going to have a long shelf life, right? Does he have the permission, or do we have to go to anybody else in order to get the IP to do this? Like, they went through that checklist, and during that due diligence process, I'm sure they went and looked at his profile and said, okay, you know what, this guy, we can do business with him. And this is, I think we're going to start to see, you're already seeing it, but more and more decisions get made around the influence that we were talking about of those subject matter experts.
Yeah, and the other place that my mind goes, kind of I don't know if it's the flip side of the coin or what, but it's really this again, the value of influence is what we're talking about. And if I think about it from his perspective, it's again, he's pretty much a I don't know what the right category is, but you can call it like a public policy health and wellness consultant or whatever,
Hmm.
right? Like that's technically, if you think about, if you look at the work he's done with, which by the way, his first project was in I think Albert Lee in Minnesota.
Okay.
I found that interesting. But anyway, um, the point being is he works with cities and municipalities and maybe states and whatever.
Yeah.
But when you look at the budgets that these entities are spending money on, right? All of them, every single city out there, to a certain extent, cares about the health and wellness of their citizens, because if they're more healthy and well, they spend less money on healthcare, and there's all this other, you know, cost savings and happiness metrics that attract more population, which creates economic impact, yada yada. Right. Long
Right.
story short, his solution is by far not the only one they're looking at.
Right.
Right. For that matter, early on, it was probably a complete crapshoot. Like, what
Mhm.
is this thing? Like, I mean, I don't know this, but if I had to guess, like, this is not the common thing that the type of thing that cities and municipalities would invest in,
Mhm.
not in this way, at least. But imagine now,
Yeah.
like, there's no way. I mean, I shouldn't say no way. Not everybody's going to see this documentary, and not
Right.
everyone is going to know somebody who's seen this documentary.
Mhm.
But I think it's a pretty high likelihood that the word spreads across, cities and municipalities and things like that. And not only is this going to drive inbound for him, I would be 100% sure of.
Mhm.
But if he is going and pitching something, there's no way they don't know about him. Or at least if they don't, all they got to do is look him up and go, Netflix documentary. What is this?
Right.
Like, I want that guy, because now it's easier to sell. Hey, we're not bringing in Joe Schmo who nobody knows. We're bringing in Dan Buettner, who's been on Netflix, and he's gone to these places and he's done this thing and that other thing. And he's got a book. Like, beat that. Like, you're not going to get fired for choosing that guy. I
Right.
mean, nobody gets fired from public policy posts, really. But
Right. No, I think something you mentioned there is I think worth highlighting as well is you're right. Nobody's out looking for this, right? Until he told them that it's worth looking at, right? So it's um, Donald Miller had the best example of this with Story Brand, and I never forgot it. He had this thing where he said he had a group of executives that were in a workshop with him, and he said, "All right, everyone, stand up and walk with me outside." Everybody got up, walked with him outside, and he turned around and looked at them and said, "Okay, um, this is why you invest in storytelling content and creating ideas." And everybody was like, "Okay, I don't get it. Like, what is this?" Well, he pointed out until told them to stand up and come and pay attention to this, nobody was paying attention. And now, because he was the authority at the time, they stood up and followed him there. The same thing is true whether you're selling blue zones or a widget or consulting services. You tell people where to put their attention and then take them along that journey. And that the mechanics of doing that is becoming more and more online, more and more around trusted influencers. And I use influencers in air quotes, right? Because you it's no longer just number of people following you. It's, do I trust the badges of credibility that you have online that you're the real deal, right? To your point, if they got, we're going to focus on wellness, how are we going to do it? You got Dan, you got these other random people over here. Why Dan? I see his Instagram content that resonates. He's got the Netflix special. He's got the book. Boom, boom, boom. 3 things. All right. When we put the proposal in front of our executive director, and he or she looks at it and goes, "Oh yeah, this is the guy with the book. This is the guy with the social media following around this particular niche, and this is the guy with the Netflix special. Okay, let's bring him in for a conversation." Now he still has to close it, but his content has asynchronously guided that decision. And that's back to your idea of world building and understanding the ecosystem. You have to understand the value chain in which your product or service plays, so that you can decide where to invest the money, right, in getting those badges of credibility. So I don't know, I could go on and on about this one, man. This is a good choice.
Yeah, well, I think we could talk about this for easily another hour, but we won't. I think we're going to wrap it up. Everybody, thanks for watching, listening, and if you can, leave us a review on iTunes or wherever you listen. Leave a comment. Send us a message if there's a particular topic you want us to cover. We want to make the show better for all of you. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week.
All right. I feel like we should do more of these.